Every Hollywood Western ever made shows you Jesse James as the outlaw with a heart of gold, the Robin Hood of the American frontier, a man who robbed from the rich railroads and gave to the poor. You have seen the movies. You have read the legend. You have been lied to for 140 years. Court records from Missouri and newspaper archives from the 1870s tell a completely different story. Civilian victims shot in the street. Confederate war crimes that never ended. A legend manufactured by a single newspaper editor pushing propaganda. The most feared outlaw in America was shot in the back of the head while standing on a chair in his own living room. Before we start, leave a comment and tell us what you grew up believing about Jesse James. In this video, we are exposing the Robin Hood myth, the Confederate hero lie, the newspaper that built the legend, and the embarrassing truth about how Jesse really died. Let's start with the myth that started everything. The myth is simple. Every movie from the 1939 Tyrone Power film Jesse James to the 2001 film American Outlaws shows you the same scene. Jesse robs a cruel railroad baron or a greedy banker and hands the money to a widow who is about to lose her farm. It is the defining image of the man. It is also a complete fabrication. There is not a single documented case of Jesse James giving stolen money to a poor family. Not one. Historians have searched the court records, the newspaper archives, and the personal letters for over a century. The widow and the mortgage story that every Western recycles has no named widow, no documented transaction, and no eyewitness. It appears nowhere in the trial records or the contemporary Missouri papers. What the records actually show is a string of civilian victims. On February 13, 1866, during the Clay County Savings Association robbery in Liberty, Missouri, the gang shot and killed an unarmed student named George Wymore in the street as they fled. On December 7, 1869, Jesse walked into the Daviess County Savings Association in Gallatin, Missouri, and shot cashier John Sheets in the head. Jesse believed Sheets was a former Union officer who had killed one of his old Confederate commanders. He had the wrong man. Sheets was a father and a banker, not a soldier. Historian T.J. Stiles, in his 2002 biography, Jesse James, Last Rebel of the Civil War, describes Jesse not as a social bandit, but as a political terrorist, using robbery as a continuation of the Civil War. The poor did not benefit from Jesse James. The poor got shot by him. If you want to know how deep this myth goes, make sure you're subscribed, because we are just getting started. But the Robin Hood story is not even the strangest part. The second myth Hollywood built around Jesse James is that he was a noble Confederate soldier pushed into crime by Union persecution after the war. The films frame him as a reluctant outlaw, a good man in a bad time. The records say he was something much darker. Jesse did not serve in the regular Confederate Army. He rode as a bushwhacker, a guerrilla fighter, under William Bloody Bill Anderson in Missouri. On September 27, 1864, Anderson's band rode into Centralia, Missouri, stopped a North Missouri Railroad train, and pulled more than 20 unarmed Union soldiers off it. Most were on furlough. Some were wounded. They were lined up and executed in the street. Later that same day, Anderson's guerrillas ambushed the pursuing Union militia and killed more than 100 men. The bodies were mutilated. Frank James confirmed in post-war interviews that he was present, and historians place Jesse with Anderson's command during this period. He was 17 years old. The gang that became the James Younger outfit after the war was in effect an old bushwhacker unit that never stopped fighting. Historian Stiles argues that Jesse saw every bank and every train he robbed as a continuation of the Confederate cause. His targets were Reconstruction-era institutions, and his politics were unreconstructed. He wrote letters to newspapers defending the Confederate cause years after Appomattox. He called Republican governors enemies. He was not a man pushed into crime by circumstance. He was a former guerrilla who treated the peace as a truce to be broken. Hollywood needed a tragic hero. The documented Jesse was something else entirely. Now let's talk about how the Robin Hood myth actually got built, because this is the part almost nobody knows. The Jesse James legend was not created by the people. It was created by a single newspaper editor. On September 26, 1872, the James Younger gang robbed the ticket office at the Kansas City Industrial Exposition in front of thousands of fairgoers. During the escape, a gang member fired into the crowd and a young girl was struck in the leg. It was a brazen, ugly crime committed in broad daylight against ordinary Missouri families. 3 days later, on September 29, 1872, the Kansas City Times published an editorial titled "The Chivalry of Crime." It compared the robbers to the knights of King Arthur, and it called the robbery a feat of daring out of the Middle Ages. It was written by the paper's editor, John Newman Edwards, a former Confederate officer who had served under General Joe Shelby, and who had followed Shelby into Mexico rather than surrender in 1865. Edwards was not reporting, he was propagandizing. Over the next decade, he published letter after letter and editorial after editorial, framing the James brothers as the last cavaliers of the lost cause, fighting Northern banks and Northern railroads on behalf of the oppressed South. Jesse, who could write, sent Edwards his own letters to print. The two men built the legend together, in real time, in the pages of a Missouri newspaper. Every dime novel that followed pulled from Edwards. Every Hollywood script pulled from the dime novels. The Robin Hood image you grew up with was invented by one Confederate editor in Kansas City trying to rewrite a war he had lost. And that brings us to the final myth, which is how Jesse James actually died. The movies give him a dramatic last stand, a shootout, a hail of bullets, a legend going out the way legends are supposed to. The real death was none of those things. By 1882, Jesse was not riding the range. He was hiding. Most of the original gang was dead or in prison after the disastrous Northfield, Minnesota raid on September 7, 1876, where the James Younger gang tried to rob the First National Bank. Acting cashier Joseph Lee Haywood was shot and killed for refusing to open the safe. A Swedish immigrant named Nicholas Gustafsson was killed in the street by a stray bullet. Gang members Clell Miller and William Stiles were shot dead by armed citizens. All three Younger brothers were captured and sent to Minnesota State Prison for life. After Northfield, Jesse spent his last years hunted, paranoid, and broke. On April 3, 1882, he was living under the alias Thomas Howard in a rented house at 1318 Lafayette Street in St. Joseph, Missouri, with his wife and 2 children. That morning, he climbed onto a chair to straighten a framed picture on the wall. A member of his own gang, 20-year-old Robert Ford, pulled a revolver and shot him in the back of the head. Ford had negotiated the killing in advance with Missouri Governor Thomas T. Crittenden in exchange for a share of the reward and a pardon. The most feared outlaw in America was assassinated in his own living room, in his sock feet, by a man he was paying to protect him, for government money. So who was Jesse James really? Strip away the dime novels, the newspaper propaganda, and the century of Hollywood films, and the real man comes into focus. A Missouri farm boy turned teenage bushwhacker, a Confederate guerrilla who rode with Bloody Bill Anderson at the Centralia Massacre at 17, a bank robber whose victims were clerks and cashiers and bystanders, not railroad barons, a political terrorist marketed as a folk hero by a lost cause editor with his own agenda, a paranoid fugitive who died in his own living room, shot in the back by a traitor for reward money. The real Jesse James was not a Robin Hood. He was not a tragic hero. He was something more complicated, more violent, and more human than any movie ever showed you. Which of these myths surprised you the most? Drop your answer in the comments. Subscribe so you don't miss the real story of Billy the Kid next.